Trump expected a smooth town hall, but when AOC showed up with receipts from his own administration, everything unraveled on live TV. You could feel it the moment the camera started rolling. The air inside the downtown Des Moines Civic Center wasn't just thick with anticipation, it was tense, like everyone knew something big was about to go down. But no one could say exactly what. The town hall was meant to be a show of unity, a space for civil discourse about the economy in front of a live, bipartisan audience. What it became was something else entirely. President Donald J. Trump stood at center stage, confident, calm, and surrounded by the kind of energy he thrived on. His supporters cheered as he waved, that familiar grin plastered across his face. His team had worked hard to make sure this town hall would reinforce his message. The economy was thriving, Americans were doing better than ever, and his administration was solely responsible for it. Flanking him on the panel were two Republican senators, one moderate Democrat from Indiana, and a few pre-approved audience members expected to ask polite, controlled questions. The structure was built for safety, something Trump's communications director had insisted on. But things didn't go to plan, because just 30 minutes before airtime, producers made a quiet but firm decision. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, invited weeks earlier but previously on standby, would be joining the panel live. No announcement, no prep time. The audience wasn't told, neither was Trump. And that's when the energy shifted. The first 15 minutes of the broadcast followed the script. Trump praised his administration's economic record, claimed historic job numbers, and insisted that inflation was under control, totally under control, more than people realize. He told a story about a small business in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that had apparently doubled its workforce under his leadership. The audience, mixed in party lines, reacted politely, some clapping, others sitting stiff and silent. But then came the switch. The moderator, a local journalist named Karen Brinson, turned to the side of the stage and said, "Joining us now is Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, live from Washington." The screens above the stage flickered for a second, and there she was, in a sleek blazer, sitting upright in front of a plain wall. Calm, unreadable, direct. Trump's smile vanished. "Oh, this should be good," he muttered into the mic, half joking, half annoyed. Without waiting for small talk, the moderator asked AOC her thoughts on the administration's claim of adding 6 million jobs since the start of the year. AOC didn't miss a beat. "I'm glad you asked, because I've got the Labor Department's official report right here," she said, holding up a printed document. It shows a net loss in 3 major sectors: manufacturing, retail, and public education. The numbers don't lie, even when some politicians do. A low rumble moved through the crowd. The camera caught a close-up of Trump blinking rapidly, gripping the edge of his podium. "That's fake," he said quickly. "Fake report. That's the media twisting it again." AOC raised an eyebrow. "It's your administration's own data, Mr. President. Page 12, Section C. You signed off on it 3 weeks ago." People in the crowd shifted, whispered, looked at each other. Trump turned toward the moderator. "I didn't come here to be attacked by someone Skyping in from her apartment." AOC stayed composed. And yet, here we are, on national television, talking about facts, not slogans. There was no yelling, no theatrics, just a slow burn that began to eat through the edges of the broadcast. But no one knew yet that this was only the beginning. Nobody expected her to appear in person. Yet 10 minutes after that sharp exchange, the side door creaked open and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strode down the aisle, heels tapping like a metronome, keeping time with the room's quickening heartbeat. A production assistant hustled behind her, clutching extra copies of the same Labor Department report she'd waved on screen. Phones shot up. A ripple of murmurs rolled from the back rows to the front as she reached the stage and shook the moderator's hand. Trump offered a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the show," he said, voice flat. AOC returned the smile. Small, steady. "Glad to be here, Mr. President. Transparency loves daylight." She placed her documents on the lectern and turned to face the crowd. The moderator cleared her throat. "Representative, you asked to present new evidence about the administration's job claims. The floor is yours." AOC lifted the first page. "Let's talk reality. This isn't about statistics drifting in cyberspace. It's about people." She flipped to a highlighted paragraph. "Take Caleb Horton, machinist, Rockford, Illinois. Factory closed in May. 300 jobs gone. Caleb's paying rent with door-to-door appliance repairs now. That's not a win, that's a warning." Trump interrupted. "We saved manufacturing. One plant closing doesn't erase the tidal wave of growth across the heartland." He gestured toward the audience, searching for nods. AOC met his gaze. "Your own Commerce Department shows a 4% drop in manufacturing jobs since January. That's not a tidal wave, that's a drain." She slid the report to the moderator, who adjusted her glasses and studied the figures. A middle-aged woman in the third row raised her hand, trembling a little. "My husband lost work at that Rockford plant," she said softly. "We're living on his retirement savings." The camera zoomed in. Suddenly the debate felt less like political theater and more like a kitchen table conversation happening in front of millions. Trump exhaled hard. "The media keeps highlighting exceptions while ignoring success stories." "Exceptions are families," AOC replied. She pulled a slim binder from her bag, a stack of testimonials collected over 2 weeks. Lubbock, Texas, logistics hub downsized, 200 layoffs. Pensacola, Florida, call center shuttered, 150 displaced. Each place, each number, visibly chipped at Trump's composure. The moderator stepped in. "Mr. President, would you like to respond to these examples?" Trump's jaw set. "Look, folks, the country's booming, wages are up, unemployment near historic lows." AOC raised a finger. "Average wage growth adjusted for inflation is flat. People feel poorer, even if headline numbers look shiny. Ask anyone buying groceries in Fresno or paying rent in Boise. They'll tell you." A smattering of applause broke out, mixed with a few groans. The tension felt raw and immediate, as if the next sentence from either side might tilt the evening into chaos. Trump leaned forward. "Congresswoman, you cherry-pick numbers. The real story is optimism, and optimism drives investment." AOC didn't flinch. "Optimism doesn't send a kid to the dentist when her mom's hours get cut. Money does." She opened her binder again, revealing a graph printed in bold colors. Household debt is up 8% since January. Credit card delinquencies climbing. If paychecks were truly stronger, these lines wouldn't surge. For a moment, the hall went quiet, heavy, almost fragile. The moderator signaled the control booth, and the graph flashed onto the giant screen behind them. Gasps flickered through the audience as the upward red line lit the backdrop like a warning flare. Trump tried to pivot. "Debt rises when people feel confident enough to borrow. That's basic economics. Or when they feel squeezed and need plastic to cover dinner," AOC countered. "Confidence isn't swiping a card at the pharmacy because insurance co-pays jumped again." A young man near the aisle spoke up, voice shaky but clear. "I maxed out 2 cards after my warehouse cut hours last month. It's not confidence, sir. It's survival." The president's posture tightened. Cameras caught every twitch, every flicker of frustration. He glanced at his notes, bullet points meant to steer the narrative. But the script no longer mattered. The conversation had shifted from policy bragging rights to lived experiences that couldn't be brushed aside. AOC gave the young man a nod of thanks, then faced Trump once more. These stories aren't partisan, they're human, and they deserve straight answers. The moderator signaled a break, but before the crew could fade to commercial, Trump blurted, "We'll fix all of this with the next stimulus, bigger than anything you've seen." The claim hung in the air, bold yet vague, like a promise scribbled on a blank check. AOC lifted her binder one last time. "Then let's write it down, sign it, and make sure families like Caleb's see the money fast." The producer finally cut to ads, a bright graphic filling the monitors. Yet nobody in the Civic Center moved. The energy felt charged, volatile, almost electric. But the night hadn't hit its breaking point, and everyone sensed the spark was still traveling toward the powder keg. The commercial break barely lasted 3 minutes, but by the time the cameras returned, the entire room felt different. It wasn't just the audience leaning forward now. It was the crew, the staffers behind the curtain. Even the moderator's voice had a subtle tremble, like she knew she was no longer steering the night. Trump tapped his pen against the desk, quick and rhythmic. His usual smirk was gone. Beside him, AOC had placed her binder on her lap and was flipping to a new section. The moderator cleared her throat. Before the break, we heard Representative Ocasio-Cortez cite concerns about job loss and rising household debt. "Mr. President, would you like to respond?" Trump nodded slowly, measured now. Sure, let me be clear. This administration has created over 6 million jobs since the start of the year. Those are facts. Look it up. We're bringing back energy, steel, even farming, real jobs. And people are grateful. The applause he was used to didn't come. A few polite claps, but mostly silence. AOC tilted her head just slightly. "I have looked it up, Mr. President." She reached down and lifted a single page out of her binder, holding it between 2 fingers. This is the Labor Department's revised employment report from last month. It shows only 1.7 million new jobs added, and that's before seasonal corrections. But what matters more is where those jobs came from. She passed the page to the moderator, who held it under the desk cam. It appeared instantly on the broadcast screen, simple numbers broken into sectors. Most gains, AOC continued, were in low-wage service positions. Meanwhile, over 80,000 manufacturing jobs vanished. Education saw a net loss. Public sector jobs dropped. This isn't growth, it's a shuffle. Trump sat up straight. "That's a distortion. Those numbers don't show the whole picture." "But they come from your administration," she replied. The room went still. Trump chuckled dryly, clearly trying to recover the rhythm. "Yeah, well, not everything from the government is accurate. We all know that." AOC raised her eyebrows. "So the numbers are only real when they flatter you?" The moderator interjected, trying to keep the room from boiling. "Let's stay focused. Representative, can you explain what you think the core issue is here?" "Of course," AOC said. She turned to the crowd. "The problem isn't that jobs aren't being created. It's that the jobs being created aren't stable, don't pay enough, and don't reflect the needs of working families." She walked forward a few steps, microphone in hand, addressing the audience directly now. "Tiffany Ramirez, Grand Junction, Colorado. Waitress. Restaurant closed. Hired at a big box store within a week. But her new job cut her weekly hours from 35 to 18. No health benefits, no paid leave. And guess what? On paper, it still counts as employed." The camera panned to an older man in the front row shaking his head. People weren't just watching anymore, they were reacting. Trump exhaled loudly. "So now you're blaming me because a waitress didn't get full-time hours at a department store?" "I'm saying," AOC replied, "that boasting about 6 million jobs without looking at how families are actually surviving is dishonest at best. People don't care about headlines. They care about rent, groceries, prescriptions." The moderator glanced at her notes, then asked, "Representative, what would you do differently?" "Fund full-time public sector work in infrastructure and education. Raise the minimum wage to match inflation, and stop pretending that job numbers equal prosperity when millions are working 2 or 3 jobs just to tread water." Trump leaned into the mic. Typical: tax, spend, redistribute. It's not how we built this country. AOC didn't back down. "It's how we rebuild a middle class, Mr. President." There was a pause, tight, lingering, before a woman near the back stood up. "I work 3 jobs. 2 are under 20 hours a week, so none offer health insurance. I've never called that success. I call that exhaustion." A few people clapped. Others stayed quiet, processing. Trump looked away. A close-up shot caught it. Just for a second, his confidence wavered. Then came the moment no one saw coming. AOC reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This," she said, "is a leaked internal memo from your Department of Labor dated 4 weeks ago. It warns of structural job losses in multiple sectors continuing through next quarter. It contradicts your own public statements." The audience buzzed. The moderator reached for it with hesitant fingers. Trump narrowed his eyes. "Where did you get that?" "From someone inside who cares about the truth." "You're playing politics." "No," she said. "You're playing pretend. There's a difference." But the memo was real, and by the time the segment ended, its contents would shake the broadcast far beyond Iowa. By the time the memo hit the screen, the temperature in the Civic Center had changed completely. It wasn't just the crowd anymore. It was the staff, the security. Even the moderators were glancing at each other, unsure of how far this was about to go. The document was brief but damning, 4 pages, with red underlines and handwritten notations in the margins. It clearly warned of a structural downturn in domestic manufacturing, retail volatility due to supply chain instability, and no projected recovery in public sector jobs through Q4. At the top, the signature of Labor Secretary Philip Westbrook, dated just 27 days ago. The moderator tried to maintain order. "Mr. President, have you seen this memo?" Trump adjusted his mic, eyes flicking to his staff just off stage. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "It's not a final draft. These kinds of internal memos float around all the time." AOC responded, voice steady. "This one was marked for executive review. That means it landed on your desk, sir. Or at least, it was supposed to." She paused, then added, "You either ignored it, or you knew and told the public something else." That line landed hard. Some in the crowd gasped. Others turned to each other, whispering. The control room was scrambling, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial again. But the producers hesitated. Ratings were through the roof. They could feel it in real time. Trump straightened. "Listen, this is theater. She comes here with printouts and wants everyone to think government is simple. It's not. We're doing the best we can." AOC tilted her head again. "If this is the best we can do, then the American people deserve better." That got applause. Real, sustained applause. Not from staffers or planted audience members, but from regular folks. Factory workers, nurses, retired teachers, people who came expecting campaign slogans and ended up watching a public reckoning. "I'd like to hear what's being done for people like us," called out a man in his 60s wearing a faded baseball cap. "My wife had her pension frozen. You say the economy's booming, but her prescriptions just doubled in cost." AOC walked a step closer to the edge of the stage. "That's exactly why truth matters. You can't fix what you refuse to admit is broken." Trump, still seated, tried to pivot. "We passed the biggest tax cuts in decades. Families are keeping more of their money than ever. Unless they rent," AOC shot back, "or need childcare or insulin, then their wallets are bleeding dry." She pulled up another chart, projecting it on the screen. Average rent in mid-sized cities like Spokane, Fort Wayne, and Bakersfield has gone up 11% this year. Childcare costs have ballooned in states like Nevada and Iowa. If families are keeping more money, they sure aren't feeling it. Trump rubbed his temples. "You can't blame me for market forces." "You're the president," she said. "You don't get to pick credit over responsibility." A beat passed. It was subtle, but viewers at home saw it. Trump's expression froze just long enough to be noticed. A man used to control, now visibly off balance. The moderator glanced toward the booth where producers waved her off from cutting again. She turned back. "Congresswoman, what's your policy solution?" "Start with housing," AOC said. "We need rent stabilization policies, federal support for low-income renters, end corporate loopholes for hedge funds that buy entire neighborhoods." A few people murmured in agreement. "Healthcare?" the moderator followed. "Universal coverage, period. No more tying survival to employment. That's why folks like that gentleman's wife are skipping medication, because the system punishes you for aging." Trump leaned back. "And who pays for all that?" She didn't flinch. "The same folks who got billions in tax cuts under your bill." Trump shook his head. "That's socialism." "No," she said, "that's math." Laughter broke out. Even the moderator smiled. But AOC didn't. She turned serious again. "There's nothing funny about a mother in Yuma choosing between formula and a utility bill, or a man in Syracuse hiding his heart medication because he can't afford a refill. These are the people you're supposed to serve." Trump tried one last swipe. "You just want to look good on camera." AOC paused. "I want to make sure someone in this room is still telling the truth." But before anyone could respond, the phones in the press row started lighting up. News outlets were already running with the memo. The story was out, and it was no longer under Trump's control. What happened next wasn't a policy debate. It wasn't even politics. It was something else, a raw, unfiltered crack in the image President Trump had spent years perfecting. The moderator was mid-sentence, trying to regain structure. "Let's return to the question of public spending on infrastructure." But Trump wasn't listening. He cut her off, leaned into the mic, and snapped, "I'm not going to stand here and be talked down to by a socialist congresswoman who doesn't even understand how the economy works." The room froze. AOC didn't blink. "Mr. President, I majored in economics. You went bankrupt 6 times. Laughter, applause, a few gasps. Trump's face flushed red. He pointed across the stage. "You're not here to debate. You're here to put on a show. You don't care about facts. You care about headlines. And you're working with the media to sabotage the American spirit." The moderator tried again. "President Trump, let's stick to the—" He stood up. That's when the energy shifted entirely. Trump towered over his podium, gesturing with both hands now. "You see what's happening here? This is why the country's a mess. Because people like her lie, twist things, act righteous while doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. She's never created a job, never signed a paycheck. All she does is talk." The camera panned to the audience. Some looked stunned, others clearly uncomfortable. The anger in his voice wasn't the familiar campaign bravado. It was personal now, uncontrolled. AOC leaned forward slightly, calm and composed. "I talk because people like Caleb Horton can't. Because a waitress in Cincinnati who's scared of losing custody over missed rent can't yell back at you. But I can." Trump scoffed. "Oh, please." "I'm not the enemy, sir," she interrupted. "The enemy is poverty, greed, and pretending problems don't exist because they don't hurt you." He jabbed a finger toward the camera. "That's enough. Enough of this. I built this economy. I saved this country from collapse. And all you do is tear it down." "You didn't build it alone," AOC said. "And you can't keep pretending success is real just because you said it on television." The moderator stood up now, trying to reassert some control. "Let's all take a breath." But it was too late. Trump's voice rose, fast and hoarse. "You think you're smart? You think waving documents around makes you right? Let me tell you something. America is winning again because of me, and you people want to ruin it." A few staffers stepped forward from the wings, exchanging glances. Security looked uncertain. AOC didn't move. If this is winning, then why are so many Americans losing? Silence. That line hit like a brick through a window. Phones went up again, audience members recording in real time. She came prepared, already trending, now exploded. But so did something else. Trump meltdown. The moderator gestured to the crew. "We're going to take another break." "No," Trump barked. "Leave it. Let people hear the truth. The fake economy is fake because of people like her, who want to destroy everything good we've done." "Sir," AOC said quietly, "your anger doesn't scare me. It scares the people who rely on you." She sat back down, hands folded. Trump finally sat too, arms crossed, breathing heavy into the mic. The camera angle shifted, showing both of them in split screen. It was a moment no one had expected. A president unraveling on live TV and a congresswoman, half his age, calmly watching him burn through his own argument. In the control booth, one of the producers whispered into a headset, "We just hit 11 million viewers." Offstage, a White House aide frantically texted updates. Online, fact-checkers were already uploading side-by-side comparisons of Trump's statements and the memo AOC had presented. Major outlets were shifting their home pages. News tickers changed mid-broadcast. CNN broke in with a lower third graphic. Trump melts down in live town hall clash. Fox News held its framing, but commentators looked shaken. Even the most loyal anchors couldn't paper over the visible spiral. As the show returned from break, the moderator tried once more to move things forward. "Let's continue with the next topic, federal spending on education." But the room hadn't moved on. Not really. AOC answered the next few questions with grace, but the focus had already shifted. The story was no longer about job numbers or budgets. It was about control, and who had just lost it. Trump didn't speak for the rest of the segment, but the fallout from that silence was just beginning, and it wouldn't stay confined to that stage. The moment the cameras cut and the credits rolled, the Civic Center went into controlled chaos. Producers whispered into headsets, staffers swarmed backstage. Two Secret Service agents positioned near the side exits stepped in close as Trump stood up, face tight, muttering to no one in particular. His press secretary, Audrey Fielding, appeared at his side almost instantly, trying to steer him toward the green room. But he resisted, jerking his arm back. "I'm not done," he snapped. "They set me up." "Sir, we need to regroup," she said, voice low. There are reporters in the hallway. If we go now, we can avoid cameras." He brushed past her. Meanwhile, AOC remained seated. Her team hadn't rushed in. She wasn't flustered. She just quietly gathered her documents, nodded at the moderator, and exchanged a few quick words with two production staffers. It was the picture of contrast. Chaos on one side, calm on the other. Inside Trump's private room, it got louder. "I want that footage blocked," he barked, pacing. "All of it. She doctored that memo. Get the lawyers involved." Audrey stood between him and a low coffee table stacked with untouched pastries. "Sir, the footage is already live. The memo's circulating. CNBC, NPR, MSNBC, even the Post has the PDF. If we try to deny it, we'll look worse." He stopped walking. "We need to spin it. Say she ambushed the show. Say she faked the signature." "It's real," came a voice from the doorway. It was Bill Andrews, one of Trump's senior economic advisors. Pale, bags under his eyes, he held a second copy of the same memo AOC had shown on stage. "I saw the original," he said. "Philip Westbrook signed it. There's nothing fake about it." Trump stared at him like he'd just stepped in from another planet. "You knew about this?" Andrews hesitated. "I flagged it for the communications team last week. Thought we'd work it into the fall messaging. I didn't think she'd get her hands on it." Trump turned to Audrey. "Fire him." "Sir, I said fire him, tonight." Backstage, in a separate room with folding chairs and dimmed lights, AOC sat quietly with her chief of staff, Neela Desai, reviewing notes. "You came in clean," Neela said. "No personal jabs, no name-calling, just numbers, receipts, and stories. That was the line to walk. "I didn't do it for the cameras," AOC replied. "I did it because I've met too many people who think no one's fighting for them." A soft knock came at the door. It was one of the producers. "Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? You've got 5 media requests already. Rachel Maddow, Anderson Cooper, Morning Edition. Even BBC wants a comment." Neela glanced at AOC. She didn't answer right away, just looked at the binder in her lap. "Give me 5 minutes," she finally said. On the way out of the venue, Trump's motorcade moved quickly. No supporters lining up, no last-minute press questions, just a silent exit under flashing lights. Back at the hotel, his inner circle was already in damage control mode. They sent out a short statement. "The president stands by his economic record. Tonight's town hall was a clear example of partisan ambush tactics designed to mislead the public." It didn't help because across social media, the full segment had already been clipped and shared. One 32-second video of AOC holding up the memo had been viewed 4.3 million times by the time Trump reached his suite. Even conservative columnist Grant Sullivan, a longtime critic of AOC, tweeted, "Disagree with her politics all you want, but tonight she made the president look woefully unprepared." And that's when it hit. CNN's Don Ferris opened his 9 p.m. slot with a brutal opener. Tonight, for the first time since taking office, President Trump found himself facing not a rival, not an opponent, but a fact-checker he couldn't shout down. It was everywhere. The footage replayed on loop, Trump jabbing the air, raising his voice, growing more and more agitated while AOC stood firm, calm, sharp, focused. The White House phones rang nonstop. Several Republican senators texted their chiefs of staff. What happened tonight? AOC's team finally stepped out of the Civic Center, walking quietly through the parking lot. No entourage, no flag waving. Just a slow, late walk to their SUV under the streetlights. Neela glanced at her. "You realize what you just did, right?" AOC looked forward, eyes locked on the dark road ahead. "I didn't come to start a war," she said. "I came to end a lie." But the truth, once spoken that loud, doesn't go quietly, and it was already shaking doors in Washington. By sunrise, no one in Washington was sleeping. Cable news had all but abandoned their usual programming. The town hall clip was everywhere, chopped, slowed, captioned, dissected. It was rare for a political moment to pierce through the noise so thoroughly, but this one had the shape of something more. It was personal, emotional, and undeniably live. At 6:02 a.m., AOC's communications team finally issued their first official statement. Short, measured, no victory lap. The Congresswoman stands by the facts presented last night. The American people deserve policy rooted in truth, not slogans. Within 30 minutes, it had over 40,000 shares. On the other side of town, inside the West Wing, a very different tone was taking shape. Trump's senior media advisor, Craig Ellison, was standing in the Roosevelt Room with 4 junior staffers, all juggling phones, laptops, and legal notes. Sleep-deprived, their conversation was more triage than strategy. "Do we deny the memo?" one asked. "No," Craig said, "it's already verified. Westbrook's office confirmed it just before 5 a.m. "Then what are we doing?" "We shift the narrative. Say it's being taken out of context. Say it was a draft. Say it was meant to show areas where we need growth, not where we're failing." "What about Trump's outburst?" Craig didn't answer right away. Instead, he clicked play on a segment from Good Morning America. The hosts were reviewing the clip for the 3rd time in a single hour. One of them shook his head and said, "That's not the president debating. That's a man losing control on national television." Craig closed the laptop and sighed. Meanwhile, AOC was already up, sitting on a folding chair inside a makeshift green room in downtown D.C., waiting to go live with Morning Edition. No makeup team, just her and Neela sharing a cup of coffee from a nearby food truck. Neela checked her phone. Your approval rating just jumped 8 points overnight among independents. AOC didn't react. She just watched the sunrise bleed through the clouds. It's not about approval, it's about accountability. At exactly 7 o'clock a.m., her interview aired across NPR's network. The host, quiet and precise, asked the question everyone wanted to hear. What did it feel like when the president began shouting? AOC paused, then said, "Like the truth was finally louder than the volume." That quote hit Twitter 5 minutes later. By 8 o'clock a.m., it was on T-shirts. Other networks chimed in. MSNBC rolled out a 4-person panel to analyze the moment, calling it the most effective on-air fact-check in recent political history. Over on CNN, former campaign advisors admitted, begrudgingly, that Trump had walked into that town hall overconfident and unprepared. Even on Fox News, something had shifted. Anchor Jack Colson opened the morning segment cautiously. Now, I don't always agree with Rep. Ocasio-Cortez, but what we saw last night wasn't spin. She showed up with evidence, and the president, frankly, wasn't ready. That comment lit up the conservative blogosphere. By mid-morning, the White House issued a follow-up statement. President Trump remains committed to transparency and economic recovery. The memo referenced was an internal working document not reflective of official forecasts. But it was too late. The damage wasn't just about the memo, it was about the image. The moment where power shifted, not with shouting, but with facts calmly presented under pressure. In the halls of Congress, it was the only topic. Representative Lowell Gant from Missouri, a center-right Democrat, told reporters, "She stood her ground without yelling. That's what leadership looks like." Even a few Republican lawmakers quietly expressed frustration, some privately admitting they wish Trump had simply answered the memo instead of attacking her personally. Elsewhere, young staffers across Capitol Hill replayed the clip on their phones like it was a highlight reel from a playoff game. The line, "I want to make sure someone in this room is still telling the truth," was already a TikTok soundbite, overlaid on footage of people organizing in food banks, teachers grading papers, nurses walking hospital corridors. That afternoon, at a press gaggle outside the Capitol, AOC kept it measured. "I didn't go into that town hall to embarrass anyone," she said. "I went to advocate for people who've been told they don't matter, and I'm not done." When a reporter asked if she was considering a run for higher office, she smiled just a flicker and said, "I'm considering how many families I can help by staying focused. That's what matters right now." But while she was thinking about the people, others were already thinking about the polls and how much this moment might shift everything. You didn't need to read the news to know something had changed. You could see it in the diners in Omaha, in the barber shops in Columbus, at the gas stations off Route 40 in Tulsa. For once, a political moment had broken through the static, and people were actually talking about it. At a community center in Topeka, Kansas, a group of retired teachers were gathered for their weekly bingo night. But no one had touched the cards. Instead, they were crowded around a single laptop, watching the now viral town hall exchange for the third time. "She didn't raise her voice once," murmured Darlene Kemp, 72. "She just sat there, calm, like she knew she had nothing to prove." Across the country in Mesa, Arizona, Hector Ramirez, an HVAC tech and registered Republican, sat on his front porch after work, sipping iced tea and scrolling through Twitter. He tapped play on the clip of AOC calmly holding up the memo. He wasn't a fan of hers, never had been. But something about that moment stuck with him. It reminded him of a time years ago when his supervisor had blamed him for a wiring mistake that wasn't his fault, and how it felt to sit in that break room, silent, while someone in power spun a story no one else challenged. Except this time, someone had. In Springfield, Missouri, Brandy Olson, a mother of 3 who worked overnight shifts at a care facility, watched the entire town hall during her lunch break. She texted her sister, "I'm not saying I agree with everything she said, but she was honest, and that's rare." The wave of reactions wasn't partisan. It was personal. People weren't responding to a political strategy. They were responding to tone, to clarity, to the strange relief of seeing someone in power calmly tell the truth without flinching. Polling agencies scrambled to keep up. By that weekend, numbers showed a significant shift in independent voters under 45. AOC's recognition ratings had skyrocketed, but more importantly, her favorability had jumped 13 points across swing states. Focus groups in Lansing and Reno revealed the same thing. People didn't necessarily agree with every policy, but they trusted that she believed what she was saying and that she had come prepared to defend it. In Erie, Pennsylvania, a small group of union workers gathered at a local VFW hall to discuss upcoming contract negotiations. Between coffee refills and notes on retirement benefits, the conversation circled back to the town hall. "She made him look like he wasn't ready," said one man. "He wasn't," replied another, "and she didn't even raise her voice." One woman at the end of the table chimed in, "He yelled, she didn't. That tells you all you need to know." Back in Washington, staffers for moderate senators were paying close attention. Their constituents were emailing, calling, even mailing in handwritten notes. A woman from Bangor, Maine sent a postcard that read, "Thank you for letting someone say what we've been feeling." At the same time, conservative media outlets were split. Some doubled down, calling the memo overblown or claiming it lacked context. But others, especially print columnists and radio hosts in suburban markets, were more cautious. A piece in the Columbus Ledger asked, "Why didn't the president simply answer her question? Why go on the defensive when transparency was on the table?" That question echoed louder than most spin. Meanwhile, late-night talk shows had a field day. Clips of Trump shouting and AOC replying with unshaken calm were spliced into comedy sketches. But the laughs often came with an edge. People weren't just entertained, they were reminded. In church basements, at Little League games, over lunch breaks and morning commutes, Americans were having the kind of conversations that politics usually shut down. Honest ones, rooted in real life. "Maybe that's what's different about her," said a grocery store clerk in Salina, Kansas. "She talks like she's already listened." The shift wasn't just in numbers, it was in tone, a quiet realization spreading across the country. One person can change the direction of a conversation, not with anger, not with volume, but with preparation, purpose, and truth. But as the public tuned in closer, Washington began to feel the pressure, and the ripple of this moment was about to hit the halls of power. Monday morning in D.C. didn't start like most. Phones buzzed earlier. Corridors filled up faster. Coffee was poured in bigger cups. Something was in the air, and it wasn't the usual gridlock. It was momentum. At 7:38 a.m., Senator Ronald Beckley of Arizona, a conservative stalwart known for rarely breaking ranks, walked into a press huddle and said, "The memo that Representative Ocasio-Cortez referenced last week, I've now read it, and I think we need to ask hard questions about what the administration knew and when." That quote ran across every major network within an hour. The ripple was turning into a wave. Inside the White House, Trump's senior staff huddled in a conference room just off the West Colonnade. Chief of Staff Marla Sutton slapped down a stack of recent polling from Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. "They're not just moving toward her," she said. "They're moving away from us." Trump sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, eyes on the wall. "She caught us off guard. Big deal. We hit back harder." Craig Ellison, his media advisor, shook his head. "Sir, every time we hit back, the focus shifts off policy and on to personality, and you come out looking reactive. She's not running a campaign, she's changing the narrative. She's lying, Trump growled. No, Craig said carefully. She's reading from your administration's reports. At the Capitol, AOC walked into a packed subcommittee hearing on employment and labor protections. Every seat was full. C-SPAN cameras were already in position. A few reporters whispered to each other as she passed, but she didn't look up. Her binder was under her arm again, familiar, worn, and full of notes. When it came time for her to speak, she didn't mention the town hall. She didn't bring up Trump's name. Instead, she read 3 testimonies into the record. A substitute teacher from Biloxi, Mississippi, who hadn't worked in 2 months. A warehouse loader from Billings, Montana, living in his car. A single dad from Toledo working 3 jobs just to afford daycare. None of them were from her district. But all of them had emailed her office after the broadcast. And in the Senate, the tremors were even stronger. Senator Clyburn Shaw of Nebraska, a Republican with a tough re-election bid, requested a closed-door economic briefing with the Labor Department. When the news broke, it was seen for what it was: damage control, quiet panic, a signal that even loyalists had started to sweat. In one of the hearing rooms, 2 junior aides from opposing parties exchanged a glance as they skimmed a fact sheet prepared by AOC's staff. "This is airtight," one whispered. "Too airtight," the other replied. They knew exactly what they were doing. Meanwhile, Trump's next public appearance, an event in Charleston focused on veteran benefits, was overshadowed before it began. Reporters kept asking about the memo, about the shouting, about the silence that followed. One question hit particularly hard. If the numbers are so strong, why not just answer her with them? Trump deflected. "We're not going to get distracted by grandstanding from a junior congresswoman trying to get famous." But people weren't buying it. The videos didn't lie, and neither did the memo. AOC, for her part, kept a low profile. She declined TV interviews. She skipped the Sunday morning political roundtables. Instead, she held 2 listening sessions in her district, took meetings with staff on a bill expanding public sector job creation, and met privately with 3 moderate Democrats who asked her for advice on how to prepare for their next televised forums. One of them, Representative Janet McMillan from Indiana, left the meeting with a full briefing packet. "She's sharp," McMillan told a reporter, "but more than that, she's thorough, and people notice." Back in the White House, another issue emerged: donors. Several high-dollar contributors had started asking uncomfortable questions. One particularly blunt email from a longtime supporter read, "You told us the economy was the message, but she made it the weakness. What's the plan now?" Trump didn't respond, but inside his circle, the scramble had already begun to rewrite talking points, restructure town halls, and prepare for a narrative shift. The balance of power hadn't changed overnight, but the story had. And in politics, sometimes the story is the power. But before the dust could settle, the conversation moved beyond politics into something bigger, something deeper, and it had everything to do with trust. 2 weeks later, the headlines had cooled. The clips weren't flooding feeds like before. The late-night monologues moved on, and the pundits found new targets. But something lingered. Not just a viral moment, not just a meme or a headline. It was a feeling, one that stayed with people longer than most political news ever does. In a small town outside Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a retired truck driver named Gary Callan watched the full town hall replayed on a Sunday public affairs program. He'd seen the clips before, bits and pieces, but this time he watched it all. No edits, no interruptions. When it ended, he sat back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "She didn't scream. He did," he said quietly. "She asked a question. He made it personal, and she stayed focused. His daughter, who was visiting for the weekend, looked at him curiously. "That change your mind about her?" He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "Yeah, it might have." All across the country, there were quiet moments like that. Not conversions, not dramatic turnarounds, but reconsiderations. People who had dismissed her, people who hadn't paid attention, people who thought politics was all noise. Suddenly, they were wondering if maybe it didn't have to be. In Boston, a high school civics teacher replayed the exchange for her 10th grade class and asked one question: what made one person lose control and the other gain it? A girl in the back raised her hand and said, "She didn't try to win, she just told the truth." The teacher smiled. And sometimes that's all it takes. The night AOC sat across from the president wasn't about ideology. It wasn't about winning a debate. It wasn't about a gotcha moment. It was about clarity. She didn't come with insults. She didn't call names. She didn't roll her eyes or shout or wave her arms. She came prepared, with facts, with names, with the weight of real people's stories resting in her hands like something sacred. And when the pressure came, when the leader of the free world lost his footing on live television, she didn't gloat, she didn't escalate, she simply stood her ground. That was the part people remembered. Not the charts or the binders or even the memo, it was the composure, the discipline, the idea that truth could sit quietly in the middle of a storm and not blink. AOC didn't walk away from that town hall with a campaign ad. She walked away with something rarer: credibility. And while Trump's team doubled down, tried to redirect, tried to rewrite the narrative, they couldn't erase what the country had already seen. Because when the noise cleared, it wasn't the shouting that stuck. It was the silence that followed it. The president shouted. She answered. He grew louder. She grew stiller. And in that contrast, people saw something they hadn't in a long time. Leadership. Not flash, not flare, but focus. In the months that followed, political campaigns quietly adjusted. Public figures began prepping for events with more care, and younger representatives on both sides started keeping binders, just in case they were called to speak on short notice. Because if one moment taught a lesson, it was this: preparation beats bravado, facts outlast volume, and sometimes strength is measured not in how loud you speak, but in how well you listen before answering. For AOC, the town hall didn't define her, but it changed how people saw her. She wasn't just a firebrand anymore. She was serious. She was thorough. She was, in that moment, the only person on that stage who wasn't performing. And for a country that's spent years buried under noise, maybe that was the clearest message of all. Don't underestimate quiet confidence. Don't ignore the person who comes ready. And above all, don't mistake calm for weakness. Because in a room full of power, the one who stayed grounded held the most of it. If that moved you, share this story. Leave a comment and subscribe for more human stories that challenge power, tell the truth, and remind us what leadership really looks like.